So let's talk a bit about that tonight, about the concentrations of power involved therein, with Adam Rizzieri, Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Jim, my pleasure, sir.
Let's start with exactly what Agency Partner Interactive is.
Yes, sir. We're a full-service digital agency based in Dallas, Texas. We do everything from digital marketing to platform development, specialize in developing e-commerce platforms, and ultimately on the marketing side, we focus on helping businesses grow, leveraging digital tactics to do so. So the conversations that we're obviously hearing right now, certainly this week, and I think really conversations that started 13 months ago with the House Judiciary Committee, they're incredibly relevant and important to a lot of our customers and, of course, to us as well as digital marketers.
About a century and a quarter ago, concentrations of power in the old line analog industries caused a lot of concern in this country. You had the things like the oil trust and the steel trust and things of this nature. That led to the beginning of the concept of antitrust laws and antitrust investigations and the like. The theory being that although these concentrations of power had given us a lot of things, the whole notion of the founding of this country was based on the idea that power should not be concentrated in a few hands, even relatively benign power. And of course, it could be argued that some of those folks back then weren't all that benign. But that fact notwithstanding, it's having the power as much as it is using it. Your thoughts about that?
You know, it's kind of crazy to think that today we have literally companies operating and competing according to antitrust laws that were written 130 years ago, back when the primary way of communicating at a mass degree was Morse code. The first email was sent in 1971. A lot of the tech giants that we're talking about this week specifically, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple as well. Google founded in 1998, Amazon founded in 1994, Facebook 2004. Apple is the oldest one, being a 76 baby. So, you know, it's crazy to think that we're trying to regulate how these companies compete based on laws that are just so outdated.
And yet, again, is the concept outdated? There may very well be individual portions of the law that need to be rewritten to accommodate modern capabilities and the like. But I'm wondering, is the concept outdated, or have we really outgrown the notion that you can be too big? If we have, or if bigness is an inherent part of this 21st century digital world, that in and of itself is rather concerning.
I think it's a really interesting philosophical kind of question and debate that could really bring up. But, you know, is the concept outdated? I don't think so. I just think that the way that it's been kind of affecting and actually practiced and in action, I think that's actually a little bit outdated. But the idea of watching a company evolve to its perfect state of being the beast that Microsoft once was, the beast that Standard Oil once was, and now the beasts that we're seeing Google really become and act like today. And let's not forget about Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. I think we just need to see antitrust laws be a little bit updated to kind of match the needs of modern times and modern businesses, because we're now at a point where these bigger companies are truly making it hard for small businesses to compete. They control the demand and supply side. So I don't think the concept is outdated.
Okay. Let me ask you about bigness in this day and age. It's an interesting era in that we are told that it is the little companies, the very quick and adaptable entrepreneurs who have led the way into the 21st century. Silicon Valley types who were lean and mean and quick on their feet and the like. And yet at the same time, it seems like these companies follow the same pattern of companies old, the analog companies, and that is to say that the big get bigger, the huge eat the big, and the mammoth eat the huge. Is there a natural tendency, do you think, on the part of free enterprise to consume itself?
In some ways, yes, I do think so. The sad result, though, and maybe it's not a sad result, but just the reality of it is, as it kind of consumes itself, it does stifle future innovation. And I think that's where a lot of the concern kind of lies. The hindrance of future innovation that's going to ultimately create better products, and better services for consumers to enjoy in the market.
We'll take a little break here, and we'll come back and we'll talk some more with Adam Rizzieri, the Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive. Their website is agencypartner.com, and we'll look at the grilling that the CEOs of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google received from Capitol Hill. We'll look at some questions that Adam Rizzieri himself might have asked that, let's say, weren't asked. And we will look at the whole notion of where we are in this day and age in dealing with the high-tech and the big-time high-tech of the early 21st century. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, and we'll be back in just a moment. As there has been a big grilling that involved the heads of the giant tech companies, billionaires all, before Capitol Hill. Adam Rizzieri, our guest Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive. First of all, what was not said that you think should have been said, that let's say, you would have brought up had you been questioning these CEOs?
I think a lot of the right questions were asked, and actually this is probably one of the more functional House Judiciary Committee hearings I've seen with this Congress. And I think, though, the difficulty lies in the fact that each congressional official was only given 5 minutes each to ask the four CEOs the hard questions. Amazon, of course, had a lot of specific questions about how they utilize third-party seller data to compete, sometimes going so far as to create their own private label products and then compete with the sellers who are on their platform. I would have liked to see some questions go to Amazon specific to Sunday delivery and kind of a sweetheart deal that they were able to form with the USPS. Something that basically gives them kind of an edge above the other sellers that are on their platform. Maybe some more conversation around the occasional counterfeit goods that are sold on the Amazon platform. My wife actually bought a baby gift for her cousin who had a baby in June, and the product that we received was actually a counterfeit product. So I think that there are definitely some real concerns with Amazon and the way they are competing right now. On the Facebook side, there are, I think, some questionable practices specific to how they engage in their M&A growth strategy. Of course, they created Facebook Camera to compete with Instagram and to ultimately buy Instagram for cheap. So I think there's a lot of things going on with these big tech giants that, frankly, are fairly natural to a competitive business when it comes to a growth strategy. But at their level, it really becomes kind of unfair when the realization is that a majority of their customers are the small businesses that they compete with.
Should the Facebook acquisition of Instagram be allowed?
Well, the FTC allowed it. They cleared it. And I think at the time the acquisition was okay, but the manner in which the acquisition took place was probably not okay. They basically looked at a 12-person company that had a lot of potential. They threatened to create basically a copycat product, being Facebook Camera, to essentially make Instagram irrelevant and ultimately a redundancy to the market. So the manner in which they went about acquiring Instagram, I think, was probably, I would say, not cool, not okay. But the actual nature of an M&A growth strategy, I do agree with.
All right. You talked about how the antitrust laws may not be adequate to deal with the 21st century companies and 21st century situations. Are there any particular aspects of the antitrust laws that you find to be, let's say, outdated or in need of updates?
Sure. So I've actually been talking to my local congressman about this quite a bit. Congressman Taylor represents my district, and the good thing is that there does seem to be agreement on both sides of the aisle just around the fact that there is a need for kind of reform for antitrust and how it operates. As to the specifics of the actual laws itself, there's three main statutes that sort of govern antitrust. Of course, you have the Sherman Act from 1890, the Clayton Act of 1914, and the FTC Act of 1914 as well. I would say probably honing in on the way price fixing is engaged. Amazon has done some things as a company to literally sell goods below cost to drive competition out of the market. There may be some attention given at the way the operation of cartels clause is written. Right now in the Sherman Act, I think we are seeing allowances that are being taken by some of these big tech giants to occasionally collude when it comes to information sharing, specifically with consumer data. And ultimately, I think the laws that are written today and the way that they're applied to these particular big tech giants, they've got the money and they've got the legal intellect to kind of get around them.
Yeah, that of course has always been a bit of a problem. We're talking again with a man who has been following this for quite some time and with a considerable degree of interest, Adam Rizzieri, and a call now from Sean, who is driving across Missouri. Hello, Sean.
Hello, Jim, and thank you for accepting my call and welcoming our guest. My question is, are they going to miss the point on sure, the antitrust regulations with the late 19th century and 20th century moguls, Roosevelt and Carnegie and such, were in power because those people had great investments. These people also have investments, but in the social media platforms, they're also influencing a greater deal of our public ideals, thoughts, and focusing, limiting and publishing and editing resources and information. Are they going to address that, the power they have on changing people's ideas and taking away ideas that aren't favorable to their platform?
Sean, I think that's a great question. I think what we're going to see is probably a combination of some actions towards reforming antitrust laws, but then also some actions around regulations that kind of govern how these businesses actually operate. You're right. There has been a lot of conversation about the way information is shared, what's okay, what's not okay. And ultimately, I think people are at a point now where they're looking for other options. If you look at Twitter specifically, which they were not present for these hearings on Wednesday, another platform has been kind of brought to the market recently called Parler. A lot of the more conservative voices that sometimes get blocked unfairly on Twitter are now moving to this other platform. Facebook, however, it's kind of a different beast. They seem to be expanding both horizontally and vertically. So I think they'll probably be subject to a combination of both antitrust laws and regulations that kind of govern how they actually go about monitoring information and kind of flagging what's okay and what's not. The shocking thing to me was kind of on the Google side, frankly, because I kind of knew what to expect with Facebook. But, we saw the election in 2016, and we also saw internal documents that were uncovered and kind of provided to Congress as part of the past 13 months of review. To find internal documents from the execs there literally pointing to the fact that they are censoring specific types of thought that's being circulated throughout the platform, I think that's extremely concerning, especially considering that, these are not just the standard oil companies that operate in the U.S. These are companies that operate in the world. So what are those implications, and ultimately who's kind of controlling the strings there?
All right, very good. Sean, any follow-up to that, or is that sufficient?
Well, with the power they have with the algorithms and the database acquirement, it's just that they just have an unfair advantage. And just if there's an antitrust regulation on that alone, they just limit the sources of information. But I thank you for your response.
Yeah, appreciate it very much. Yeah, this is not the same kind of concentration of power that Carnegie had with steel or Rockefeller had with oil, is it? It goes across a variety of points as opposed to just the manufacture of one given product in the case of a century ago.
Oh, absolutely. It's really kind of incredible to watch. And of course, the result of a lot of what these companies are doing, the results are generally good. But I think that there are a lot of potentially negative implications that come from some of their research, especially around the world of AI. So, as these companies recognizing that they are U.S. companies, they have to really be clear about whose side they're on.
This, of course, is the era of international companies, international virtually everything, I suppose. And to the extent that these companies can cross national boundaries very, very quickly. Carnegie could not pick up a steel mill and drop it in the middle of South Korea, or Ford could not pick up an auto factory and drop it in Mexico, Rockefeller, an oil refinery, and this sort of thing. Today, mobility has got to have something to do with the power to actually regulate.
Right. Fortunately, these guys don't have to worry about floating railroad ties to get across the water,
Well, that's certainly true.
The power of the internet.
Yeah.
To their benefit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you have these companies that have these massive data farms, and they actually rely on a multinational effort to support their operations. Some of it's economies of scale, some of it's having cheaper real estate here and cheaper cost of labor there. So the reality is for the bottom line of these businesses, they do require that multinational effort. You look at Amazon, you look at Google, especially, and now you look at Facebook and just the way they're growing. A lot of their revenue and a lot of their actual work hours performed by their employees comes from around the globe.
All right. Now then, in terms of how we deal with these companies, there are those, I think, in other countries which don't have the concept of antitrust that much. Really, they get big. If you're in, say, a Japan or a Germany, I don't think they care as much. I have heard it expressed, actually, that the concept, and you've already addressed the concept, that you don't feel the concept of antitrust is obsolete, but there are those, I gather, in this world who feel that way. If you're going to be really successful and help make your country's economy really successful, you've got to be really big. Is that true?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think that the concept of antitrust is around for a reason. The reality, too, is that the Texas Attorney General is just one of 49 other states' attorney generals that are leading an effort to explore and investigate.
Yeah. We got to pause briefly. We'll be back in just a moment. Back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We're talking with Adam Rizzieri, Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive, and their website is agencypartner.com. We're looking at Congress questioning the CEOs of the major tech companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. And as the break intervened, you were talking a bit about how regulation is affected by the international aspect of today's economy.
Well, it's been interesting to kind of see how Europe is actually playing a lot more strict than over here in the U.S. This isn't Google's first time to have their wrist slapped as it pertains to antitrust. They got slapped with just a little bit of a $1.7 billion fine last March over the way they were kind of governing their own business and running their ad tech. So, just from a global perspective, I think we're just now sort of catching up to what some of the other players in the globe have kind of been seeing, especially on the European side. And ultimately, too, the small businesses are the ones that are crying for this change. The big guys, these big giants, if you think about it, they're kind of able to sort of set the rules and also kind of lay out the field at the same time. They really use their power to occasionally infringe on smaller businesses' patents, and then also, too, really kind of have the biggest voice when it comes to negotiating deals. So these questions of antitrust, I think, are very important, and I'm really glad to see that now, after 13 months of review by the Judicial Committee, we're starting to talk about this now in a very real way.
Infringing on a patent, that strikes me as something that no matter how much power you have, it ought to be difficult to do. That is to say, patents are granted on certain aspects of a development, an invention, a process,
right.
And they're all very technical. I've actually watched, for example, a case in a patent court. It's, trust me, folks, it's very geeky, but it does seem much more precise than you find in an ordinary courtroom. So it would seem to me that it comes down to either you did infringe or else you didn't infringe. There's not a lot of gray area there, and so if you can do that, it would strike me that you have a lot of power indeed. Or am I simply misinterpreting what's going on here?
Jimbo, all I got to say is if the glove doesn't fit, you must have quit. I mean, we've heard that before, right?
Yeah, we sure have.
How good is your attorney?
Well, okay, there is that, of course. Yeah.
No doubt. So when it comes down to it, just kind of looking at what Google's doing right now to kind of, I guess, butt up to what the attorney generals are doing, they can drag this out. They can make the legal battle very, very exhausting and expensive. And so if you have this small player who's got an in-house attorney that's the guy's dad versus Google's, 30 or 40 person legal team or however big they are, mm-hmm. It's kind of a tall fight, right? It's kind of a rough battle.
Yeah. Now then, the notion of the liberal bias that is inherent by some estimations in these various companies. Have you seen evidence of that? Frankly, it seems to me that there is that there. I'm not sure what the standard of proof is in a courtroom, but it certainly seems to pass the smell test. It certainly seems like there is such bias.
Yeah, it's disappointing to see, but I do think that it does exist. We've seen internal documents from Google indicating that, specific to the Hillary campaign in 2016. Jim Jordan was very, very vocal about his thoughts and fears about kind of what would happen in the upcoming election, specific to favoritism towards specific types of campaign advertising. So, yeah, is there bias? I think that we've seen that there is bias present. As to its prevalence, like you said, it's kind of hard to prove sometimes. There was I think it was Congressman from Florida, Congressman Stobe, was saying that his own father, who has a Gmail account, wasn't able to receive his campaign advertising in Florida. You know, you would think that the guy whose son is running for office would want to see his son's advertising, right? So Is there some bias? Maybe. I think we've seen some indicators of it. The person in me, though, I hope it's not as prevalent as what it does seem to be.
Perhaps of all of those who testified, Jeff Bezos of Amazon was arguably the most anticipated. He is the world's richest person. He had never before appeared before Congress. How do you think he did? Did he treat them like they were a wholly owned subsidiary, or how did he do?
You know, Bezos, I think we'll just say he did his best. You know, hats off to him for his first time there. Zuckerberg's kind of a veteran now when it comes to battling with Congress. So Bezos, though, he had a lot of hard questions that he could not answer. I think if you look at Amazon's history with small businesses, they have, in some very real ways, found ways to unfairly compete with small businesses that are on their platform. You know, at what point does Amazon decide to stop using its third-party seller data to stop trying to compete against their existing sellers? You know, Bezos, I don't think he really had any good answers to some of the questions that were thrown at him. And frankly, I think it's because the House Judiciary Committee did their job. They spent 13 months preparing for this.
Bezos, I gather, referred a lot to the trust that Americans have in Amazon, that this company is by America, for America. It is as American as apple pie. That's what I got? And if that was what he was pushing, did he sell it effectively?
Not at all. No, not at all, unfortunately for him, because the reality is people know what Bezos believes from a operational perspective, and he believes in AI. Nah, not at all. No, he believes in AI and robots, and unfortunately, I don't believe he did.
Fair enough. Let's go to Randy, who calls in from Reading, Pennsylvania, for our guest, Adam Rizzieri of agencypartner.com. Good evening, Randy.
Hey, how are you guys doing tonight?
We're well, thank you.
Hey, Randy.
I want to talk to you about something that I was aware of about almost 50 years in the grocery business. And I had a friend who was a buyer for a major bottler, and he went to Walmart to make a deal, as they often do at different places. They have their sizes and whatnot. They offer their deals and prices. And, of course, bigger stores get better offers. Well, Walmart went to them one time, and they said, hey, we're not going to buy your 32-ounce size. We want you to make a 29-ounce size, and this is what we're going to pay for it. And he said, well, what if we can't do it? He said, then you don't deal with Walmart, and that's nationwide. It sounded like blackmail to me. And I've even heard that also with, they do it with farmers. They basically give them the price you're going to pay for their crop. And they say, if you don't want it, fine, go somewhere else and try to sell it. You won't.
All right, your thoughts.
So
go ahead.
Typical, unfortunately. Yeah, it's so typical, unfortunately, that you see them really, they have all the power, right? And they know it. So if they're going to make a deal with you, it's going to be on their terms.
All right. Anything further you wish to add to that?
Size instead of 32, and if you go to a Walmart, you'll see what I'm talking about. They have, instead of like a 32-ounce size of like a cranberry sauce, they have like a 28-ounce size. They don't have the size that you see in the regular stores, and it's all these deals they make, and they basically say that you're going to give us our bottling at our price, or we don't buy. And to me, that sounds like blackmail.
Well, it sounds like blackmail, like price fixing. I mean, again, we're talking about things that sound pretty open and shut antitrust to me, Adam.
They make it really hard to compete when it comes to that. You either do or you don't. You play ball by their rules or you don't. And that's just the bottom line. So ultimately, they're making those decisions based on their own internal needs, whether it's, I can fit more products on the cart based on this size at this unit price. They don't really necessarily concern or have concern for that particular seller or that particular supplier. And unfortunately, like Jimbo said, they're the ones kind of making the rules and forcing you to play by their rules.
All right, we'll be back with more on the Jim Bohannon Show in just a moment. And welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show with our guest Adam Rizzieri, the Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive, their website agencypartner.com. And we're talking about how the CEOs of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google did in their recent congressional testimony. It is said, of course, that the answer to monopolies or oligarchies, concentrations of economic power, the answer is more competition. How easy is it to get into this line of work and to compete with the big boys? I would assume that it must take an enormous amount of capital and expertise.
Yeah, if Adam Newman from WeWork had a different business model, he probably could have competed against these guys with the capital that he raised. But without capital, you're not going to go far. Ultimately, you'll get a little bit of traction, and then one of these guys will take notice of that, and they'll find a way to buy you for cheap.
Is that in and of itself a sign of a need for some kind of reform?
I would say so, Jim. I think it is a sign of a need for reform, specifically when it comes to the M&A growth strategy as it pertains to, or as it's kind of spawned from the desire to buy a competitor. That's one of the things that Facebook as a business has been guilty of a few times. Instagram was one of those victims. And I think actually just last year or the year before, the Instagram founders left Facebook, and it wasn't exactly a hugs and kisses sort of parting. Those guys were bought under terms that weren't necessarily their most desirable terms. So, yeah, I'd like to see some reform as it pertains to that.
Did I hear you make reference to M&A strategy?
Yes, sir.
I'm afraid that's a term with which I'm not familiar, and I always use my own level of ignorance as perhaps kind of a benchmark for the audience. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, a mergers and acquisitions growth strategy, basically buying up those other companies that you would either compete with or companies that would actually augment your existing operations. So it's one of the ways that a lot of companies grow these days. They basically find a way to use financial resources to build their business.
All right. Very good. Now then, in terms of just flat out taking antitrust to the extreme and just simply saying, okay, you're too big. We're going to split you up into 3 Amazons and 4 Googles. Is that at all an option here?
I wish I could say it was going to be that simple. This is going to be a really, really difficult thing. You have a lot of different layers here that are sort of like intertwined and intermingled, and it's going to be somewhat messy. When you look at just kind of Google's ad tech as it exists right now, if you were to just totally disassemble it for what it's worth today, you would really, really harm the company. And I know a lot of the antitrust changes that would take place would be kind of imposed in such a way that doesn't just totally cripple the business from the way they operate today. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be as easy as disassembling pieces for some of these guys. Facebook, maybe, they've got WhatsApp, they have Instagram, they have these products that basically could potentially kind of move away from their core business being Facebook as it was created in 2004. But it's not a simple thing, unfortunately.
All right, very good. We'll pause. Yeah, we'll pause briefly. We'll come back with some more with our guest, Adam Rizzieri. He is with agencypartner.com, and we're looking at the extent to which antitrust can deal with information giants. We'll be back at 1-866-50-JIMBO in just a moment. The Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626, as we look at just what we learned after the big CEOs of high tech testified on Capitol Hill. Adam Rizzieri is with us, the Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive. And perhaps the powers that be learned a great deal about what they need to do. Did the rest of us, did we simple consumers who are a mere bugshot on their corporate windshield, did we learn anything at all about dealing with these companies?
Did we as consumers learn about dealing with these companies? What do you mean by that, Jim?
In other words, we don't have a lot of choices in many cases, but just by what was said in those hearings, did we simple consumers learn anything at all about dealing with these companies or choices that we might have to make, this sort of thing?
Oh, I think probably a lot of the people that were watching these hearings, and granted, this was like a 5 or 6 hour hearing on Wednesday. It was quite long. People probably learned some things that they didn't know were actually taking place. Most specifically as it relates to Amazon and just the way they're competing, I think a lot of people were fairly aware of kind of some of the things that Google, Facebook, and Apple kind of was able to hang out in the shadows for a majority of the hearing. But, some of the specific new things I think that people might have taken away from it would have just been the fact that Amazon is really competing with their sellers, using third-party seller data, and also creating sweetheart deals with organizations like the United States Postal Service to offer Sunday shipping and provide levels of service that, frankly, their third-party sellers just can't offer.
What are the odds that these 4 might become 3 or 2 or even 1?
I would say the odds of that are fairly slim. I would see the 4 of these companies maybe becoming more like 8 or 10 or 12. You might still recognize their branding, but I think you might see Google kind of be broken up in more of a business segment sort of way, such that they're not controlling both the demand and supply side of their markets. You might see Amazon operating in such a way that really they're not competing with their third-party sellers, but not as they are today at least, but operating kind of more as a true retailer and not just a platform. So I think the nature of the way these companies compete will change, and I think it's all going to be kind of done in the interest of innovation and really just providing kind of a better output to the market.
In other words, you're saying that this might happen voluntarily on their part, not as a result of government action?
Oh, no. This will not happen voluntarily. This will be a nasty fight.
They'll be ripped apart by the government.
Yeah, it's not going to be a friendly exchange. And there will be an appeal too, just like with Microsoft. There's going to be some sort of ruling, and they're all going to fight it. And this will take probably 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said that some of these companies, if you break up the number 1 company in the world, that they would simply become numbers 1 and 2, that they would be that big.
That's possible, but I think the result that we would see from that would be a bit of destabilization in the market, and you would probably see like a 4 or a 5 player, or maybe a 3 kind of come in such a way that just kind of destabilizes the way competition exists. And then all of a sudden some innovators are going to come in and just totally change the way things are done.
Are there other companies around the world? These are 4 names familiar to Americans: Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Are there other names out there, Mitsubishi or what have you, that aren't American?
You know what? There are, but I would say that the bigger stuff, the cooler stuff, it's all happening here. And, America is this beautiful country that really is a combination of a lot of immigrants, right? One of the fastest growing companies right now, an immigrant new to the United States, worked really hard to create his own company called Zoom. And Zoom is now taking over market share in a really strong way. And I think they have about 13 million active users per month right now. So, I think you're going to see the American spirit continue to change things. And I think it's going to be kind of all here in America is where it's going to happen. Is
there something called, what is it, TikTok?
TikTok.
Yeah. Am I right?
Yeah. TikTok's a thing. You're right.
Yeah, okay. And I've heard it said, I've heard this online, so I don't know if it's true. The Chinese are behind it. Watch it. And then likewise, I've heard that said about Zoom.
Yep. So Zoom's an American company. Right. They're over in San Jose, California. But TikTok actually hired a former Disney executive to kind of run that business. They're doing everything they can right now to sort of create a barrier between Beijing and themselves. But the reality of TikTok's ownership, they are a Chinese company, but they're doing a lot of things to try and kind of create some distance there, because obviously it's not a good day to be a Chinese company operating in the United States for revenue.
Well, perhaps not, but nonetheless, if you're a Chinese company and you expect to maintain distance from the Chinese government, I dare say that's well nigh impossible, isn't it?
Not even Hong Kong can do it. They have this.
Yeah.
I guess they've delayed their election for a year, right? And now
but I mean, the moment that Britain handed over autonomy to the Chinese, who promised, crossed their heart and hoped to die, that Hong Kong will remain autonomous. I mean, that was such a bogus nonsense. That wasn't going to happen, and everybody knew that, who paid any attention at all. So likewise, the idea of any separation at all between TikTok and the Chinese government, that strikes me as fiction.
Hard to believe, right?
Well, no, I mean, not just hard to believe, but impossible to believe.
I would agree with you. I think the real concern, though, with TikTok is more on the information side. What's all that data that they're collecting? What are they doing with it? I know a majority of it's being stored like in Singapore, and they say not physically in China, but there's a lot of concerns about the fact that with AI, with the power of smartphones, you can literally scan someone's face and read that with greater accuracy than a thumbprint. So Are they indexing that information? What are they doing with it? What are they learning about what we're doing? I mean, there are some concerns there.
Yeah. All right, stay on the line. We'll speak off air. Again, Adam Rizzieri is the Chief Marketing Officer at Agency Partner Interactive, their website, agencypartner.com, as we have watched the grilling of the Big Four high-tech company CEOs. I'm Jim Bohannon, and this is Westwood One.